Welcome everyone to Revel 11. If you would put in the chat where you're joining us from today. Where are you? I'm in Seattle. And then if you would also put in the chat, what drew you to our conversation today? And I would say one thing that drew me to interview Erin was her amazing new book about entrepreneurship. So, and being an entrepreneur myself, it's been a very meaningful book to read, and I'm excited to share it with you today. We'll let people being open to new start. Shannon, thank you. I love that. I love learning from women leaders. And yes, Ruth, that's wonderful as well. So thank you. Thank you for being here. I am just thrilled to have Erin Wade, the author of the Mac Cheese Millionaire, which we're going to be talking about. But really what resonated with me with this book is that I left a corporate career many years ago. And quite honestly, the reason why I left was it didn't make any sense to me. It didn't make any sense about how women were treated in the workplace. This was a long time ago. And also how people treated one another. And so I left and started my a company 25 years ago, which is the other hat that I wear, as I have a communications company. But I started the company with a strong vision, mission, and purpose, which again is something that's really important in Erin's book that we're going to be sharing. And every chapter of the book is an opportunity to learn how to take risks, stick with your vision, create your own roadmap, and do well by doing good. And it is true that a small company, whatever the size, can make a difference on a national level. Erin is a best-selling author, chef, and entrepreneur. Erin opened a wildly popular restaurant, Homeroom, which has been covered everywhere from Cooking Channel to the Wall Street Journal. She wrote the best-selling author, the Mac and Cheese Cookbook. I get hungry every time I talk about this, and wrote a viral op-ed in the Washington Post named one of the publication's best of the year, which we're going to be talking about. Erin's work on business culture has been covered in Forbes and the New York Times. She lives in the Bay Area with her family and an array of surfboards, which I love so much. So here is her fabulous book, The Mac and Cheese Millionaire, Building a Better Business by Thinking Outside of the Box. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. So, Erin, take us through the early years of you making the decision to, live with purpose and passion and maybe not having that, societal job that we all kind of grasp onto in our early years.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wish I could tell you that I made this choice just fully of my own volition. And one day woke up and was like, I'm going to do things differently. But I think this happens with many people. There was a catalyst, like sometimes someone has a death in the family or someone gets sick. For me, I was fired. I was working as a corporate attorney, making a lot of money at a young age, frankly, to be doing so. And yeah, and I was fired, and it was because I deserved to be fired. I wasn't really putting in effort. I didn't really care about what I was doing. And so, we can talk more about my circuitous journey of getting there, but I realized that I just had not really enjoyed any job that I'd had, and that felt really, really sad to me. And so I had this dream of opening a restaurant. I decided to open a mac and cheese restaurant. And honestly, it was really my Hail Mary to fall in love with work, to sort of take a chance and see, could I create the kind of workplace I had wanted to work in, but had never found yet.
And talk to us about, let's just go way back. Mac and cheese, like my favorite food as a kid, my grandma made. And so why mac and cheese? I mean, it's just so interesting that you decided to do something that really nobody else has done ever, mac and cheese.
Yeah, I mean, so the origin story of it is that I was coming home one night. So I had worked in restaurants previous to being a lawyer, but it was very dead end. I was making terrible money. I was not being treated well. It was just, I saw no future in it. So I did what, generations of smart but lost people have been doing and went to law school. So anyway, I'm working as a lawyer, and one night just having a really crap day, and I come home and I have this craving for macaroni and cheese. And I realize, I live in Oakland, California. It's a major urban center, that there's no restaurant I can go to that has good mac and cheese. And so I pull out my dad's recipe that I grew up eating. I start cooking it. And as I take a bite, I'm like, this is incredible. My dad's recipe is the best version I've ever had. Like, why is there no restaurant where I could go to get this? And that was sort of when I had this aha idea, like, oh, there should be a mac and cheese restaurant, and I should be the person to open it.
I just love that so much because you never know where that nexus point of a great new opportunity is going to come from. So that is
Totally.
great. So talk to us about, so you you get fired.
Hmm.
You go home, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm sure I've been
Hmm.
fired as well.
Hmm.
And what happened? Like what take us on the route from, it's like, okay, I've got free time now. How was that route for you? What was the journey like?
Well, I realized like lucky I was very employable. I had offered I could go back to basically the same thing I was doing, but for a different company if I wanted to. But I had this really pivotal phone call with a close friend, and I was like, oh, I've been wrestling with this. I've always wanted to open a restaurant. Like, is now the moment to try it? And she was like, well, what's the worst case scenario that happens if you fail? And I was like, well, I'll lose all my money. So that felt scary. I was like, I'll, be embarrassed because I'll have to, all the people in my life will know that I just failed. And and then she's like, well, I can't help you with the embarrassment. But she's like, I think anyone who loves you would think that it was amazing that you tried something that you had always dreamed of. And as for all the money that you lose, like, yeah, you can't, make it up, but couldn't you just, like, you're not going to lose, like, couldn't you just go back to being a lawyer? And I was like, oh my God, she's right. Like, I was already living my worst case scenario, and I was thinking about doing it again, and so instead of like really taking a risk on something I might love, I was thinking of just settling for something I knew I would never love. And when I realized that, I was like, God, I'm too young and life is too short to be making those kind of trade-offs right now. So I decided to just take the leap and to try.
And so when you set out to start your company, you wanted to do it differently than what most leaders would want to do when they started a company. So tell us about that journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had this really utopian ideal of a kind of place that I wanted to work that had never been offered to me that I wanted to offer to other people. And honestly, it was pretty reactionary. The only thing I knew is that I had never felt like I had had a deep sense of like autonomy and freedom in places that I had worked. And so that was sort of what I focused on that I wanted to give to other people. But what I learned was like, honestly, a lot of it's dystopian when you're working in a world that is like very structured and rigid and you don't get to be yourself, but it's also quite dystopian to create a world where there's no real rules and no one knows what to do. So I mean, a lot of the book frankly is like, since I didn't have, it was really the trial and error towards figuring out how do you create something more with greater meaning, with greater purpose, with greater connection when you have no role model that you've seen doing it. How do you do it? And experimenting and failing to success.
And I love that about your book. So I started my company when I was 27 and I had no roadmap either.
Yeah.
But I have to
Yeah.
tell you, I feel like this is the roadmap for any person who wants to start something new. So was it harder or easier than you thought?
I mean, it was much harder than I thought. Yeah, I think it is like it really, if you are interested in entrepreneurship, I do think the closest thing to it is really having a child. And it, just like having a kid, it takes time to incubate it. It's like months, it, changes your life, you lose your sleep. And then when it's born, like you'll never not think about it. Like a day will never go by. So I think it was huge, but I always say that my worst days as an entrepreneur were better than my best days as a lawyer. So I think certainly worth the effort.
And can you tell us why? Just like talk to us about all of the reasons, even though the journey was harder than you thought, like on a day-to-day basis, what drove you every day?
Well, it's funny. This anecdote is really at the end of the book, but I think really, really encapsulates what was wrong with places that I had been working, what's wrong with, I think, a lot of places that we all work, and then what was meaningful about what I got to build. And it'll be a lengthy story, but I promise it will make sense. Um, so, I'm a big surfer, and surfing is really in many ways a lot like business. It's very male dominated sport, and it's very winner take all. So if you don't know anything about it, the rules are that when one person gets on a wave, they get it all to themselves. So it means when you're out there in the ocean, you're just like literally elbowing your way, trying to be the first person on the wave, like shouting people off. Like it's just very aggressive, and winner take all. And it's also quite hierarchical anyway. But this one day I went out surfing, and it happened to be all women that were in the water, and no one even knew each other, but it was like there was a different rule. And instead of competing for the waves, we started talking and like communicating and collaborating and taking turns. And if it was safe to, we'd find a way to share them, and we'd cheer each other on. And so instead of it being an individual sport, it became a practice of collective success and of being a part of something bigger than myself, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that that really encapsulates like what I learned about female leadership, why I think my company was special to work for. I think, I given the book tools and strategies to like creating those kinds of experiences in your life, or in your workplace. But yeah, it was meaning, purpose, connection that just had been totally lacking in other places.
That's such a great analogy and just something that I embrace as well. So talk about feminine leadership styles. So you did a little bit there about the collaboration, but what does female leadership mean to you? And what would our audience take away from how to lead as with this feminine essence?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me it came down to really three things. Like if you think about that surfing story, right? Like a lot of communication between lots of people. It wasn't like you could be a newbie, you could be surfing for 20 years. All those people were talking to each other. So I think communication, collaboration, right? Figuring out how do we all like do this together versus everyone not talking and just going like their own way. And this idea of collective success, which is we
Mhm.
care about everyone who's here in the water being successful, not just ourselves, right? So I do think those are really the three cornerstones. And I give a lot of like tools and tricks in the book for how to bring that to life. Because I do think a lot of companies will say like, oh, we're so collaborative or we're so this, and it's meaningless. It's honestly bullshit most of the time. But there are ways that you can bring these concepts to life in an everyday way. And I think they're really powerful and they're really fun.
Well, let's dive into collaboration a little bit more. And tell us how the collaborative style that you led with impacted your business, and then also more about the national impact that it had.
Sure. So, I mean, we had a lot of things that were really collaborative in what we did. I'll give like two different examples, but one I talk in the book is we were an open book company. So would teach financial literacy to people and share our basic finances. And then everyone would collaborate on how to make them better. And I think, and we would get feedback daily, weekly, hold meetings weekly where anyone who wanted to was paid to attend and provide feedback. So I think to my point about, collaboration, like a lot of people again will say like, oh, it's a collaborative workplace, but like meetings are really stratified. People at the top don't work with people at the bottom of the ladder. And so we made it really flat. Like I still had a traditionally hierarchical structure at home. It wasn't like a hippie commune, but anyone who's a dishwasher could come to that meeting, could know how we're doing, could tell us how to do better. And even if they weren't there, we had people filling out information every single day, like about how we were living the mission, what their experience was like, how to improve, all these things. So
Uh,
I think, that's really powerful. Like that's how you become a great team versus just an assemblage of individuals
yeah.
doing something
And
different.
you talk a lot about transparency around, like the financials. And, there's a great example of how you made $150,000 in a weekend.
Yeah.
And, just, how the team was like, what? Like, can you just go through that story a little bit and talk about that, how transparency works?
Yeah. So, a lot of people when they hear that, it's like, oh, that would never work for my company, or that's scary. Or then people are going to like want to take more money from me. And you know what? Like maybe if you're a gigantic software company or something, maybe that's true. But in my experience, it is like couldn't be further from the truth. It's that even if you don't talk about money, people still think about it. They still think they know what you make. And I guarantee it is like dramatically more than the company actually makes. So, Homer is actually a very, very successful company, like top 1% of our industry. But that still means like overall, like we're not making anywhere near what people might think that we're making, right?
Mhm.
So how one of the events that we sort of launched being open book with was we would do this huge music festival that would happen in San Francisco. And we didn't even accept credit cards at the time. So it's nuts. Like I tell the story in the book of like I'm carrying like, tens of thousands of dollars
Yeah.
of cash out of the park because I'm like pregnant. It was very scary. Anyway, but so yeah, we grossed like $150,000 in the weekend in cash selling $8 mac and cheese. So,
And everybody was like, woohoo, we did it. Like, I can't believe that,
totally.
right?
Yeah. So everyone thinks like literally I'm going home, like I'm buying a new house or something.
Yeah.
But then when we start, breaking down the numbers from the event, like 40% of that had to actually go back to the music festival, right? Like that was their cut. It was a huge cut. And then once you took out food and we looked at labor and all these things, like it was actually a money losing event. It was great marketing for us. People loved the product. I'm glad we did it. We did it many years in a row, but we actually made like negative dollars on the event. And people were shocked, right? Like the perception versus reality was different, and it changes how they think about it, how we approach it. We talked about, should we even be doing this? Is it valuable? And like those are really meaningful, helpful conversations.
Yes.
And I will say, even if the truth is you are making as much money as people think that you're making,
Mhm.
I think there's also a real lack of understanding of why profitability is good and benefits everyone. And I think that also matters. So like people would think like, oh, if this restaurant makes a certain amount of money, then like the owner just walks home with it. But that also is not true. That's like how we pay for growth. That's how we pay for improvements. That's how we give bonuses. That's like, it gets taxed like, anyone's money that like um, it's used for so many different things that benefit everyone, not just the ownership. And I think there's a real lack of understanding there too that is helpful.
I think that's such a great example, and just a reminder that transparency is so important, and it makes a company better. And so going back to collaboration, you had some workplace harassment take place at the restaurant, and tell us how collaboration brought the team together, and then also you became an example on a national level for how to deal with harassment in the workplace.
Yeah. So, like I said, we had this very open, flat, collaborative culture. And so I found out that unfortunately, a lot of our servers were experiencing harassment. And I honestly was pretty shocked and I didn't know. And I thought, we're creating this amazing place to work. I couldn't believe this was happening sort of right under my nose. And so I invited them. I do think, again, so many workplaces are set up where someone reports a problem, maybe someone else is expected to solve it for them. Again, that's not enjoyable for anyone. It's a lot of pressure for leaders and managers, and it's pretty disempowering to the person who's having the problem, right? So we would collaborate on it, and so I just invited anyone who wanted to come and give ideas to solve this into a meeting. And we talked about it and again experimented with a bunch of things, like, failed with some stuff, but eventually came up with a system that, I mean, I'm happy to describe it for folks, but it was so successful that I wrote a Washington Post op-ed on it, which became very viral. I was invited to Washington to testify in front of the EEOC. They adopted it as a national best practice. And now the system is used in bars and restaurants truly all around the world and has just like really made a huge, huge difference in the industry. And I think it just shows like what the power of, even just as one small restaurant, like we're able to like literally create global change. And I think that's possible when we work together in a meaningful way to solve our problems.
And I really want to point out that the staff said that they had talked to their managers, which were mostly men at the time, and they
Mhm.
didn't really listen, but they knew because you were a female leader that
Mhm.
you would care and open the door to them for them to come in and voice their concerns.
Totally.
And that would not have happened if you had not had an open door policy, if you had not been collaborative.
Mhm.
And having that, being a female leader makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it makes a huge, huge difference. And I honestly, we did have a lot of male managers at that time. And I started focusing moving forward. I mean, obviously on creating a place where also, male leaders are going to be successful. But I started really realizing why it was so important and why I needed to focus on it more and really like cultivating like female leaders within my organization.
So let's talk about for those women who are female leaders there or who are interested in opening a company and being an entrepreneur. Besides the things that we've already talked about around communication, collaboration, and collective voice, like what else would you say would be the three top things that you would want people to walk away from this conversation today?
I mean, one, I would say like get your feet wet doing that thing. Like I do talk about it in the book how I had had this career in restaurants first, but actually did a lot of other stuff I had done in food that doesn't even make its way into the book. So, and it's because I think again, like the more experience you can have, I think we're sort of, it can be so scary to get off the path that anytime we're willing to just pursue a passion, it's like if it's not successful right away, it's easy to give up on it. And I think the truth is like finding a great career is really a lot like dating. Like you figure out what you do want often by going through what you don't want, right? Like think about how many
Right.
people your average person will date before they meet the person they're going to marry. And I think like work is no different, right? Like we might have a concept of like, oh, I'd really like this kind of a thing, but until you do it, you don't know. And so I mean, even to your point earlier where you're like, oh, why mac and cheese? And I gave you the heartfelt story, but there was also a really practical business reason behind it, which was I'd worked in restaurant kitchens. I knew I didn't want to be the person sitting behind the stove cooking the food every day. And I knew that only because I had been that person for a lot of years. And so
Mhm.
I wanted to come up with a food that would be still the best version anyone had ever had, but that I could teach other relatively inexperienced people to make and have it still knock your socks off, And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't
Yeah.
worked in restaurants. So I think whether it's, volunteering, whether it's, doing paid work, I just really advocate like try doing the thing you think you might want to do or getting as close to it as you can because it'll help you know if it's actually the right move.
And yesterday we had a prep call and we were talking about how there's no roadmap for starting a business or following your passion. And talk about, like, I just feel like in my own journey as an entrepreneur that, I've had to, go down to the right and to the left, but then ultimately all of those paths that I started or crafted all have come back to be, it's all part of me and has
Mhm.
led me to where I am today, with
Totally.
Rebel 11 and my PR firm. Tell us about your roadmap and how you would encourage people, women, to continue regardless if you hit a barrier, because just anyway, what's your advice? Because we all hit those barriers. I guess that's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say. I'll hit those barriers and I'm like, I'm not going to do it. Peace out. I'm going another direction. So What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. I did that too. Like I said, I started out cooking, and when it didn't work out, when it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, I left and I just sort of gave up and became a lawyer. But I mean, I circled back to it eventually. So I think I would encourage people to stick with it and not think, oh, the first try has got to be the right try. I have an analogy in the book that I use. Like I have this like asparagus tattoo on my arm, and the reason I like it is this metaphor for life, which is if you don't know anything about the asparagus plant, if you were to look, it takes multiple years to develop its root structure before you ever see any asparagus spears.
Mhm.
And then when you see it, if you were to see a field of asparagus, you'd be like, oh, that's like 100 different spears, but it's actually the same plant. It's just all connected underground. And so I think all of these experiences, even the ones that feel like failures, like do sort of add to your store of like knowledge and understanding of yourself and what you want. So being willing to hang through the discomfort of being like, ooh, well, that wasn't right. That wasn't right. If you still feel a passion for that thing that's driving you, you'll eventually figure it out if you're willing to hang in the sort of like awkwardness for long enough,
Yeah.
you know.
In looking back on your journey, what surprised you? I mean, what took your breath away, or what were some things you're like, huh, wow, like this is really exciting, or wow, I never expected that to happen.
I mean, sort of all of it. I think, when you deal with like, I mean, I would come into contact with like thousands of members of the public, and I had, at the time I sold the company, like a team of 100 people. Like, I mean, people are life's greatest surprise. So I think, you can really feel like on top of it, and someone will do something that surprises you. But I really enjoy feeling like I can be to the extent possible in control of my world and react to the things that I'm seeing and be like, okay, I can do this. But I think, I also mentioned in the book, I think something that surprised me is, like honestly, like how confusing and hard our government makes it. I think I found that shocking. And, and also in food, like there's really like an incredible amount of regulation. And, I think I find that sort of depressing. It makes it really expensive, really hard to do something that I think should be a lot easier to do. So I think that's unfortunate, but that's just the reality.
So, were there any failures or mistakes that led to better things in new business? Marianne would like to know.
Oh, I mean, every single thing. So I would
Everything.
say pick a copy of the book because the stories are pretty funny in terms of like all
They
the
are. There's so many great stories in this book.
it's pretty much all failures that led to better things. And actually, I talk about that with regard to the sexual harassment thing. That was really scary for me because I felt comfortable with failure as a means to learn. But all of a sudden, when we were coping with people's personal safety, I was like, oh my God, I don't know if this is like okay to take risks. But honestly, even with that, like, you know, we had to try things out to learn what did or, didn't work. I'd say one of the biggest failures and mistakes, like I said, was I started out feeling very reactionary to rules. And so I started with like no rules. I was like, wear what you want, take vacation when you want it. Like, I trust you. This is going to be great. And it's actually quite terrifying to people. And it made the restaurant like a shit show. Like, no one could figure out, customers couldn't figure out like, who worked there. It was very stressful for staff members. And so, um, sort of a metaphor that I use that I sort of which is where I sort of landed, was realizing like, okay, most places I'd ever worked were a lot like a paint by number. Like everyone's paint by number is going to look the same no matter what. Uh, because you're told where to put what colors. And then what I was handing people is a blank sheet of paper. And guess what? A blank sheet of paper, whatever people are going to create is going to look totally different. There's not even going to be one line that's going to look the same. And that's also a disaster, right? That's going to be a company that has inconsistent service and, no one knows what they're supposed to do. So what you want to be handing people is really a coloring book, which is like there needs to be structure within which people have the freedom to be themselves. And I think, honestly, a lot of the sort of ridiculous stories of trial and error are figuring out, oh, what is the right structure within which people should be free? That's sort of, I think, the art of being a great leader, honestly.
Yeah, that's fabulous. So talk to us. I mean, there's so many lessons that you've already talked about. Can you tell us about the steps that when you decided that's like it's time, it's I've done this for long enough, and did you go out and recruit a buyer? Did they come to you? Like, how did that work? You started mac and cheese at $8 a bowl and you sold it for millions. What was that journey like?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was a really successful restaurant that was actually, I mean, earning millions of dollars a year, even when I was just running it. I had been offered, I had had people interested in buying many, many times over the years. So after a decade in business, I just decided, honestly, I was sort of reaching a point with myself where I was like, I don't have a personal desire to scale locations here. What I really have a deep desire to do is to like write this book, to talk about our ideas, to bring the ideas of this book to the public. And I happened to be approached to sell. And, um, it just sort of, it honestly just lined up where I was like, oh, okay, this gives me the freedom I want to do this. But it's also sad because you have to, like I said, it's like having a child and it's like putting your child up for adoption and someone else is going to go raise,
Yeah.
it.
And what have you learned from that experience about yourself?
Um, I think, gosh, I mean, so many things. Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing is that you don't get to get something new without saying goodbye to something old. And I think that can be painful and hard as much as you might want it. Like I intentionally chose to sell the company. I have no regrets about doing so. It was really painful. Like people assumed I'd be thrilled and happy because now I had just a big pot of money, but it's actually very hard. I also, like I was excited to move on to a new chapter, but there was a lot that I loved about the old chapter. And I had to say goodbye to the stuff that I didn't love and I was ready to move on from, as well as the stuff that I did love and didn't want to say goodbye to, they came as a package. And I think that happens a lot.
Well, the chapter of this book that you took the time to write and now to share with others is just fabulous, Erin. And as I've mentioned, I resonated with so much of what you said in here. And again, for any entrepreneur or woman in business, there's so many great stories of success and ways to think out of the box and do things your way. And the whole concept of purpose and mission is so critical. Can you talk about that? And I mean, would you suggest when people are thinking about running a company, about thinking about mission and purpose first? Should that be the nexus point of us like doing things your own way? How important is that?
I had like a mentor who's like a Fortune 500 CEO, and she gave me great advice, which was that she had a personal mission statement just for her life, like the
Mhm.
way that companies do. And like I was like, oh, that's really brilliant because
Great idea.
you just like a company, it's so funny. Like, why do we have this for a company, but we don't do it for ourselves? Like, having a North Star of like what your life purpose is really helps, guide you. So I'd say like start there.
Mhm.
I mean, I think I proved like anything can be an avenue for that, right? Like I did that with macaroni and cheese. Like you can certainly do it with
Right.
anything. Um, but yeah, but I think you also do have to be passionate about whatever it is that you're actually doing every day. Because as much as the thing that like really propelled me was like to create this really meaningful place for people to come, both to work and to enjoy, a meal, like I still had to be like damn good at what we were doing, like what the baseline thing was, and care about that industry and still be the best at that, or you can't really build the other stuff on top of it.
That's so true. So Marianne wants to know, how do you balance your life and your work?
I've actually found that to be the best part of being an entrepreneur. Like I think I had a realization at some point. I was like, I'm gonna be stuck working 5 days a week in offices for other people, even though that system
Yeah,
really doesn't work for me. I can't focus for that many hours. Like I just really, it felt off for what I wanted to do.
agreed.
So, I mean, people think it's nuts. They're like, who the heck goes into restaurants for better work-life balance? But I was like, I feel confident if I'm my boss, I can give myself the life that I'd like to have. So even though it was like stressful and involved like many years that were very exhausting, yeah, I feel like because I get to be my own boss, I get to pick. So I actually don't find that hard because I get to choose, you know?
Right. I want to share a story about that because, I've been an entrepreneur for over 25 years. And I didn't have a work-life balance for a very long time, but then it got to me, and then I'm like, oh wait, I have a life outside of work. And so
Yeah.
I think I spent, about 10 years trying to figure that out. But I really do have a wonderful work-life balance, and I'm so grateful for that.
Mm,
But I just heard a woman speak. She's here in Seattle and she owns a catering company. And she set out with the intention of being home every day for her kids.
mhm,
And so she and her whole team, they get off at 2:30 and
mhm.
she works 4 days a week. And she's been home for her kids every day. She's got a $25 million business.
Wow.
But she set out with that intention. So I
Sure.
don't know if it's a catering company here and called Gourmando. And I
Mm,
don't know that if she had set that intention, midway through her career,
mhm.
whether that would have happened, but setting that North Star, that
Right.
goal, that really propelled her forward. And, she has a thriving company here. God bless you.
Thank you.
Um, so in closing, what are any other things that you would like to leave with our audience today?
Well, I mean, I would say no matter what you do, even if you like what you do, making time to like pursue your passions is like, I find the key to either keeping that interest alive or to getting inspiration for what my next moves should be, you know? So, I think whatever like brings you joy, like really making the space to pursue that and do it feels really, really critical.
That's the perfect ending.
Yeah.
Concentrate on what gives you joy. I want to say that again and again. Thank you so much. Her book, Erin's book, is The Mac and Cheese Millionaire. You can't forget that. Building a better business by thinking outside of the box. Erin, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so inspired and go get them.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I had a
Thank
lot
you.